Today's show is sponsored by Adventures Unlimited Press. Take your mind on a literary journey and go to adventuresunlimitedpress.com to purchase books from our famed experts right here on Truth Be Told. That's adventuresunlimitedpress.com.
What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome back to another hour of Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and with me now is Walt Lusk, sitting in for Eddie Connor. And I know you people out there are just like us here in the studio. We love a great new topic, and we love great mysteries. Yes, we're going to talk about the Bermuda Triangle. And what it is, the Bermuda Triangle is a mystical section of the Atlantic Ocean, roughly bounded by Miami, Bermuda, Puerto Rico, where dozens of ships and airplanes have disappeared. Well, our guest that we have on the show today, Gian Quasar, is an expert on the Bermuda Triangle. And get this, ladies and gentlemen, he is also the first person to completely document the Bermuda Triangle incident by incident. His research began over 12 years ago, and since then he has compiled the largest private repository of reports and official maritime documents containing over 350 cases spanning over 2 centuries. Over 150 of these have been disappearances in the last 25 years. His tendency in finding every scrap available has gained him popular recognition as the man responsible for bringing the subject forward for an entirely new generation. Gian is the author of multiple books, including Into the Bermuda Triangle, Pursuing the Truth Behind the World's Greatest Mystery, and They Flew Into Oblivion, The Disappearance of Flight 19. And Flight 19 was 5 Avenger torpedo bombers that disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle on December 5th, 1945 during a Navy overwater training flight. All 14 airmen on the flight were never seen or heard from again. To shed a brighter light on the Bermuda Triangle, please welcome author and expert Gian Quasar. Gian, the crowd went wild for you.
You have no idea.
They love you. Of course. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for being part of our show.
Well, okay, here's the thing.
Some of that introduction from the book?
Some of it was, yeah.
Yeah, because it's 26 years now since I've been doing the triangle.
26, wow.
Yeah, then Tony made up the rest.
I was just born about 26. I'm just kidding. I wish I was. Yeah. Well, we want to thank you for being here. And this is a subject that we have not touched on before here on Truth Be Told. We've been doing this for almost 2 years now. And this is something I've always wanted to because, again, we've heard about the Bermuda Triangle for all my life. So I want to get started by finding out your background of how you got started even being interested in the Bermuda Triangle.
Well, I don't know, it just finally came about after reading a number of books on it around that time, 26 years ago, that I started to look into it, and I wanted to see if there was truth to it, it would still be going on. Now, in 1990, the last books written on it were in the 1970s.
Oh, wow.
So there's about a solid 13-year period in which nothing was heard. You only heard it was solved or it was all bunk. And so I started doing my own research to see what had happened since then. And newspapers don't give you much. A lot of the stuff goes unreported.
Not anymore.
And even back then for this. And so I stumbled upon the database of the National Transportation Safety Board, and I asked for database searches for every aircraft posted missing or unrecovered. And I started doing this in blocks of maybe 10, 12 years. And I uncovered that in that time, since no one had heard anything about this, 50, 60 aircraft had vanished. Over the period of 1970 and 79, over 24 aircraft vanished. And then I started doing older database searches. And there were about some 40 aircraft that vanished from the 60s, from the beginning of the database, from 1962, through the 60s and 70s, a period when all the books were written and all the hype was going on.
Right.
And they never appeared in the books. The authors did not know about the database. They were relying on the rare newspaper report that occurs.
Oh, wow.
And so I continued to research this for off and on for the whole decade of the 90s, and by the time I put my website up in 1999, I didn't realize I was going to shock people the way I did, because everything on the web at that time was debunking the subject based upon the old books in the 1970s. They were debunking a mystery no one knew anything about.
Well, I know I was talking to some friends today that I was going to be on air today, and they're going, the Bermuda Triangle, that's like so yesterday. It's like really? I said, absolutely.
Nice.
I know. But that's one good thing that you did, is you brought this.
Yeah,
to
you brought it up
into the next
Sure.
generation. Where, like you said, I remember, In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. I remember he talking about it in certain shows back in the day that talked about it. But this, this has been going on since what? How many centuries that they've talked about the Bermuda Triangle?
Since man has sailed the seas in
Yeah.
that area. It didn't get the name until 1964.
How did it get named?
Oh, wow.
Was it just?
Vincent Gaddis was a journalist doing an article for Argosy magazine. And so the area was known as a watery triangle, a deadly triangle. That was the colloquial. And so in order to give it reference, he just called it the deadly Bermuda Triangle.
Mm.
And so that stuck.
Interesting.
Well, that makes
But
sense.
it's only since 1964 that such a name has ever been applied.
Now, are there still, I don't know if you've done things recently. I'm just curious, are there still disappearances of vessels and crafts and stuff
Oh, yeah.
today? So, in other
They're
words,
occurring closer to land today. A lot of travel does not go out there anymore because of the economy. It's been dropping off for 15 years. But the disappearances now simply occur closer to land or derelict vessels. You'll find quite a lot of those.
interesting.
You
So
don't hear
it
about
hasn't
usually.
stopped. Wow. That's not surprising.
Or
in some
something that,
respects.
a starving dog on board. That still occurs and the owner's gone.
Well, what was one of the first?
Wow.
Yeah.
Not just beings on the vessel, not even the vessel. Interesting.
Excuse me?
So you're talking about people that are on the vessel, not the vessel itself.
Yeah, the vessel's derelict. It's the people are gone, or the animals might remain.
Wow, that's pretty crazy.
Do you have any
That
theories?
occurred recently in the past, 5 years. There's an incident where only the dog was aboard starving when they boarded the sailboat.
Do you have any theories on that?
In that case, no one was really too sure. He was an expert sailor, and I think he might have just fallen over. I don't know why. It's when you get derelict boats where 2 or 3 were on board, and then there's no one that it's time to worry. But there's an awful lot of sailboats where just the owner's aboard and they're gone.
That's pretty. What was the first case that you looked into?
I mean, get an actual document. I'm not sure. It could have been the Flight 19 case. Could have been something at the National Archives where I had searching for documents. I think it was with the National Transportation Safety Board. After I got the briefs to everything I asked for accident reports, to those after 1978, they are lost prior to that time. Only the brief exists. So the accident reports were sent to me for a lot of these, and that's when I started reading the details of, an aircraft coming into land and the tower operator just shifts from the window watching its landing lights. It was at night. He looks at the radar to make sure another aircraft is taking off just fine. He looks back out the window, and the aircraft that was landing has disappeared, and they never find a trace of it.
Wow.
And it's just not long before it touches down. That occurred in St. Thomas, I think 1978.
Nice.
I talked to the traffic controller later. I was able to find him in the 1990s. He even appeared on one of the Discovery Channel shows.
Uh-huh.
And he basically said what the report said. His name was in there. That's how I knew who he was. And he didn't know what happened. He diverted an aircraft right away that was coming in behind that. It was a twin-engine charter coming from St. John's. And the pilot looked around, looked down, couldn't see any trace. And he was coming in for a landing, and no ELT signal, which is typical of all disappearances.
Now, what's that?
Emergency locator transmitter.
Oh, okay.
It's
So in other words,
an automatic
it's
alarm that's
right.
in the fuselage of a private aircraft, or in a military aircraft, it may be under the seat, and then sounds when they eject. But in this case, in a civilian aircraft, it is in the fuselage. So if it impacts, it will jettison and it'll send its own automatic signal, and satellites can pick it up, base stations, other aircraft, and then home in on the point of the accident.
And in this case, it was just that wasn't even there. So that implies the whole craft just evaporated.
Yeah, no, there's
in thin air.
over 120 aircraft I know of had ELTs, and never has a signal been sent.
My
That
goodness.
is
They
fascinating.
vanish without any indication that they've impacted with the ocean at all. And over time, they don't leave any kind of eye, as it would be called, a marled area, an oasis.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the disappearances occur over the shallow, well, not a lot, most of the disappearances occur in the Bahamas section of the triangle. And many of the banks there are very shallow, and you can see right through to the bottom, 20 feet down or something. So if an aircraft wrecks, crashes in that area, or a ship, over time, bottom growth will be attracted to it, and the nice, clear, velvety appearance of the bottom sands and so forth will change. You'll see the turtle grass growing. It'll be a little oasis underwater. It'll look like this dark green little marled area,
Mm-hmm.
and even that does not happen over time. So there's no indication of any kind of crashes, both immediately over or with time, in the area where most of these aircraft vanish.
Now, in all your research, there has to be somebody that's went through the Bermuda Triangle and had an incident where they've actually survived it. Have you had, or how many accounts that you've either interviewed or heard of that that did survive some type of vortex or whatever?
Many of them. They get in the book. If there was 2 or more witnesses, they got in the book. What the experience is usually with is what's called electronic fog. And Bruce Gernon is one who encountered that, and he's the one who coined the term. He and his father and another pilot were with him. And other pilots have basically said the same thing. As he said, it's you'll think you're flying through a fog bank. It conducts around you very suddenly. It's a grayish metallic type of mist. You'll think you're flying through a fog bank, but you are not. In reality, the fog is flying with you.
Oh, wow.
So you get you can get spatially disoriented, and so pilots could crash. In Bruce Gernon's case, and a couple of other pilots I've spoken to, everything, the power is still there, but nothing's working. The compass is going haywire. Loran might not be working back in those days, and radio isn't working. And if you stay calm, which you should, and you look straight up or straight down, you usually should be able to see the sky or the ocean. It's only around you. Martin Caden has reported that with a number of people on that flight of the PBY from Bermuda to Jacksonville. They were in it for 4 hours.
4 hours.
And everything went nuts on board the aircraft. Another pilot who might have gotten spatially disoriented was, I think, in about 2001. Gus or Chuck was his name. He was playing tag with a Coast Guard aircraft for drug interception practice. He was near Marathon in the Florida Keys, and he signaled that everything was clear. Marathon reporting station said his visibility was 12 miles. And suddenly he reports to the Coast Guard interceptor and base that he's IMC, which means instrument meteorological conditions. He cannot see his horizon. He has to fly by instruments. And then he's gone. This was perfectly clear weather. And a while later in the search, they did find bits of his aircraft floating below. And so he might have lost control, had spatial disorientation.
Crashed.
He lost his horizon and did a dead man spiral. Something happened. but no one can explain how in 12-mile visibility, and the Coast Guard aircraft is perfectly fine, but he alone signals he's in meteorological conditions, and then he's gone.
That's
And
kinda-
nobody saw the flight, and nobody saw the plane. It was just disappeared and then crashed. Wow.
No, they were over the Bay of Florida at the time,
Oh, okay.
Now,
near Marathon in the Florida Keys, if you know where that is.
and,
It's one of the major keys in the Florida Keys.
oh right, yeah. And I've heard about like vortexes or even somewhat of a black hole in the Bermuda Triangle. But definitely there's no proof. But what is your theory on what is going on? Do you think it could be extraterrestrial? Do you think it could be natural nature? Electrical current, or what? I mean, what do you think it is?
Well, it has to do with the electronic fog, so that's not only a cause but a symptom.
Right.
As for vortex, that's just, you mean a black hole? That's fantasy type
Okay.
stuff. There are dead spots. Those are known to exist where everything just shuts off. The radio.
Really?
There's one south of Everglades City, I'm told, in the Bay of Florida. There's a couple of other locations where nothing works. You fly through it and it does not work. There are incidents in which the compass in the Bahamas will simply point in another direction. And the locals are so used to it, they don't make a big deal out of it, because in the Bahamas, with all the land, you just steer by point of sight. So stuff goes on out further that does have to do with electromagnetism. And electronic fog obviously has to deal with that. And right now there's only one scientist that I know of who studies it as much as he can, and he works with Bruce Kernan on that, and he's out of the University of Nebraska. But that would be, I think, one of the biggest factors is to not only accept electronic fog exists, it's still quite controversial.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an official meteorological condition because no one can explain it or reproduce it technically. And so it's as I said, it's a symptom, and it's a factor in its own.
Now,
But as for aliens, out of all the reports I've gotten, I have only one aircraft disappearance that was preceded by the pilot panicking and talking about a weird object harassing his aircraft.
Oh, really?
And I do have the Mayday. It is online on my website.
And when
this
was
occurred
that?
a long time ago. This occurred in 1980.
1980.
Yeah, and an Iberia flight picked it up, and it was being recorded by air to ground. And the pilot was there with his passenger, and he was trying to get to the coast of Puerto Rico, and a weird object kept diverting course, and he was panicking over it, preventing him from getting to the coast. It was off Cabo Rojo, which is the big UFO sighting area off Puerto Rico. It's on the west coast
Yeah,
of
I've
Puerto
heard there's a
Rico.
big UFO spot off Puerto Rico. Did he make it, or did something happen to him?
No, the aircraft completely vanished with both people aboard.
There you go.
Is there other places on Earth that equivalent to the Bermuda Triangle?
Not really. You'll hear that there are, off Japan, you get a lot of incidents, but on the whole, I think people were pretty desperate to, at that time, Yvonne Saunderson was the one who made that popular with his viral vortices, that there's 12 on Earth. And it really is not. The triangle stands out
Interesting.
separate and distinct.
Well, I heard there was one sort of on the U.S.-Mexico border where it's not quite that disappear. Things kind of, like rockets and planes and stuff, kind of go haywire in that part of on the land when they're flying over.
No, nothing really matches the triangle. When you
Okay.
know how much disappears out there, when you know how odd some of the stuff is that survivors have reported, you'll realize that it has nothing to do with the amount of traffic. There's other areas that are just as trafficked as the triangle.
Sure.
Coast Guard keeps statistics, and the disappearances are nowhere near the same. The first Coast Guard district, for instance, is off New England, and that has a huge amount of traffic. And that's heavy seas off New England.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do the database search for all the aircraft that vanish. You can look at the Coast Guard statistics for calls for assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And calls for assistance are almost the same amount as in the triangle, to be 12,000 per year. And the amount of disappearance of aircraft might be 3 or 4 in foul weather, whereas the last decade that I have the stats for, it was 20 in the triangle.
Right, and
And
obviously,
those are disappearances in fair weather.
right, in fair weather, and also the ones up in England. I mean, it's a much higher traffic, so on a percentage basis, it's a lower, with reasons.
And the Mediterranean is always going to be a huge traffic area, and they have nothing comparable.
Okay.
And now that the information has come out, I guess it surfaced after it was lost so long. It was Commander Sigsbee's study in 7 years from 1887 to 1894, something about all the derelicts in the North Atlantic. And he noted in his study that the majority of derelicts occur, and he gives a latitude and longitude, and this is off the southeast coast of the United States, in which today is the Triangle. So even back then, it was noteworthy. Out of the 1,628 derelicts he studied for 7 years, the majority will be concentrated in that area, and where they find the others are where they were drifting around the Sargasso Sea, which is the current around the Sargasso Sea that goes through the Triangle.
Right.
So kind of guilty by association.
And my thing is, how come even back in the Mariner times, or like Columbus area, because they all sailed through there, if they've heard so much about that area being kind of doomed or whatever you want to call it back in the day, why did they even allow or even suggest people to go through that area even to the day? It's like, why would people even want to fly through there if there's so much mystery goes on there?
Well, it's still a minor amount compared to all the traffic that's out there.
Right.
A minor amount still disappears. It's simply that's more disappearances elsewhere, and that it is in fair weather, and that the circumstances are quite peculiar. In the days from Columbus onward, the foul reputation the area had was because of the doldrums of the Sargasso Sea.
Mm-hmm.
But they would sail through the area because it was the best way to get to the Americas.
Yeah,
they
it's a
would
straight shot.
ride off one of the currents.
Yeah, it's a straight shot.
At the south of the Sargasso Sea. And frankly, the place you cannot avoid traveling through the triangle anyway.
That's true. Yeah, because it's a huge area, body of water that you have to go through. Well, let's talk about one of the most famous
Flight 19.
Yeah, Flight 19 disappearances.
Five planes.
Yeah, talk about that and tell us when you started doing research on this, because this is pretty fascinating that not just one but 5 planes disappeared.
That's the beginning. So I investigated that right from the start. Flight 19 was the training flight of 5 Avengers out of Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale on December 5, 1945. And they were flying a triangular pattern, which was basic. They would fly over the Chicken and Hen Shoals. One pilot would be leading, one of the student pilots. This was for advanced overwater navigation. These were qualified pilots, but now they were qualifying for overwater navigation, and the next step in their training would be landing on a carrier. This is not training that Army pilots have to go through. This is what Navy pilots have to go through.
Right.
And one pilot would lead one leg. The next student pilot would lead the next one, and the next, and so forth. And it would be a triangle. And the instructor would be behind them, watching them and grading them with a clipboard attached to his leg. And so they took off on a routine flight, should be about 2 hours and 15 minutes. They made their mock bombing run at Hen and Chicken Shoals. They continued on. We know they went to the Berry Islands, to Great Stirrup Cay. According to this, they were on a certain triangular flight plan, so we know all the points of it. They headed north to go cross over Grand Bahama, which is a huge island. And somewhere in there, the flight leader believed that his compasses had stopped working. And so he ordered the flight to another heading, which he thought was the correct heading. And they must have flown this for quite some time. And then, since they did not overfly Grand Bahama, obviously he became worried. And then another pilot in another flight starts hearing these pilots talk about where they could possibly be. And it's a discussion on compass headings and so forth and what might have happened. And whatever they agreed to, they must have headed in a northeast or westerly, then northeast heading, and somehow got out of the Bahamas without ever seeing a major landmark. And base stations and the other pilot and the other flight were picking them up off and on. And this went on for a couple of hours, and finally contact was lost, and the flight was never found. Not one shred of evidence from these 5 aircraft, and these are the biggest single-engine aircraft used in World War II.
Oh, my.
A TBM Avenger, it carries 3. And that is the story of Flight 19. There was no trace ever found. And a huge search, the largest in peacetime, failed to find one trace of anything.
What did?
And so that gave the area its reputation. That got
Sure,
world news.
that'll get somebody's
vanished.
attention.
Yeah, wouldn't it?
And that is what started the journalists beginning to look into it. And it was followed within the next few years. Was followed by some of the most sensational disappearances of airliners, mainline airliners of that time. 2 Tudor 4s vanished, which was a British aircraft. 1 DC-3 filled to complement.
Oh, my word.
Vanished in December 28, 1948. In between. So let's see, you have the Star Tiger disappeared in January 48. The DC-3 NC-16002 in December 28 of 1948. And then January 1949, Star Ariel, sister aircraft of the Star Tiger, vanished south of Bermuda. So Star Tiger was coming into Bermuda. The DC-3 was from Puerto Rico to Miami, and they were coming in for a landing. And then Star Ariel had not long left Bermuda. And then there was another big military DC-4 that vanished. So this is what got it kept the whole snowball rolling.
Mm-hmm.
About an unusual area where aircraft and ships disappear for no reason. So just within that period of time, it's like the Malaysian flight, having 3 jumbo jets within a year and a couple of month period, vanishing without a trace. It would be world news for a long time.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
it would be.
Yeah.
And back then, that was the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, at a military aircraft, a DC-4, it was a C-54. That would be the civilian DC-4. That was another big 4-engine airliner. That vanished in 1947. So now picture a huge military aircraft vanishing, along with 3 other jumbo jets today, and you have the good reason why people were quite fascinated by the concept of the triangle when that name finally came about.
Sure.
Well, here's another one that I found interesting, and this was one of your later books. It was released in 2014, A Passage to Oblivion, The Last Voyage of the USS Cyclops. Talk about that one, because that's pretty fascinating, and you kind of brought some new light to that yourself.
That would be the Cyclops' appearance in the closing months of World War I.
Mm-hmm.
But she was on a coastal route from South America to Baltimore, and that is probably, to me, that has nothing to do with the triangle. In reality, I think it could be our mutiny on the Bounty. I looked into that, and the captain of that ship really was. You see the film incarnations of Captain Bligh, played by Trevor Howard, or
yeah.
or Charles Lawton. In reality, Captain Worley was probably like that. There was a beheading in his background of his first mate. There was embezzlement. There was the fact he was actually a German national, and he had assumed another name. He might not even have had his master's license. And he was pro-German. He had a very rare cargo on board. He had a proconsul that was discovered to be pro-German. He surrounded himself by pro-German crew. Remember, this is the Naval Auxiliary, most people don't even know what the Naval Auxiliary is because it doesn't exist anymore. But it was more or less the last in a line of merchant trader warships. The Bureau of Navigation owned the ship, and there were civilians aboard, but they wore naval uniforms. They were in Naval Reserve now because of the war. So it wasn't like it was the real Navy. And so you could have, a few of the officers were known or discovered during the investigation to have been born
Right.
in Germany and Austria. You have Norman who were found to be born in Germany, and Worley was just really a crank. He would lock his men off the bridge. He would chase them around. He would
Oh my God.
put an ignorant Greek seaman. One guy said he put an ignorant Greek seaman at the helm and just sailed the ship on his own way. He would put people in the brig with very little excuse. He really was. He was our Bligh, and he came to this country when he was 15. He jumped ship as a cabin boy, joined his brothers in San Francisco. He spoke perfect English because he grew up here, and he just always said on his paperwork he was from San Francisco. But he probably incited some kind of reaction, some kind of attempt at mutiny, or I don't know what, because his last voyage before this one off France, 40 of his crew did sign a petition trying to get him removed. And he had to go through a board of inquiry before this voyage, and he was just so indignant that to him his crew were scum anyway. He was so indignant
Traitors.
that he had to go through that. And I have the records of that. They preserved them.
Oh, they
You
did.
get to see all these guys testifying about what their captain was like, that he was a drunk, that he would be stumbling through doors. He chased them off from the gangplank, and he wouldn't let them have liberty. If you were in the Naval Reserve, the real Naval Reserve, because the real Navy would be shifted onto these auxiliary ships, he didn't like the real Navy. So he would treat the real Navy guys bad, but the auxiliary men he would treat better. And so he would let the auxiliary guys have liberty, and the real Navy guys could not have liberty. So he was just a real bias, and
Sound like it.
something probably happened. And so that's the basis of a passage to oblivion, is that there is an awful lot of clues that do indicate we might have had some kind of mutiny or sabotage of that ship, and maybe a small group of conspirators did get away.
Well, one thing about you that I really enjoy is that your research and your chosen topics of your books, because it's not, you kind of branched out from the Bermuda Triangle and went to some other different areas, from Jack the Ripper to Bigfoot, and some other areas. Why do you write the books that you do? I mean, is it something that just seems like a passion that you have to tell a story, or it's a research that you just want to put on paper? How do you choose your topics that you write about?
It's I don't know. It's mystery. No one knew how to qualify me after they realized I did more than the Triangle. People didn't care who followed all these. All these have little genres.
Right.
True crime and Bigfoot certainly, and those type of topics. But no one did the Triangle. When it came out that I was doing all this, people were impressed. I was given all this praise.
Mm-hmm.
The film was even optioned. The book was even optioned for film at Paramount.
That's great.
And so when it became obvious on my website that I looked into all these other subjects, it was not appreciated.
Really?
No, I finally, I would tell people I'm the most hated man in some of these subjects, and some people, some radio hosts even say, well, you're not hated, but you're ignored. Bigfooters hate me because I started rewriting the background by looking at all the original Frontier accounts and everything. But a section will come off and follow what I'm saying, and so it's a quiet minority that will support my views, my research, whereas the majority will simply prefer to ignore me. I wrote a blog, a post, the man Bigfooters love to hate, within the last month or so, me, and it got all this coverage. They were sharing it on Facebook and so forth, but they won't say anything. I know people who are within the core group, and they'll say you're a pariah. But no one knows how to qualify me. That's why I was so happy when one journalist just called me the real life Kolchak, and I thought, that kind of fits. I have a curiosity for mystery, but I like to investigate it in order to solve it, not just churn it around, get my own chill and thrill. And so real life Kolchak I thought was real nice. And then Randy Wainwright, who wrote a bestseller based on Flight 19 on his character Doc Ford, looking for Flight 19. He wrote a nice review for me saying how the biggest danger for me is that I'm going to be associated with the wacko fringe because of the topics I investigate. But then he gave me some very nice praise for standing separate and distinct. So I think I have that on some big page on my website, that endorsement. I stand separate and distinct on a genre. I don't even know what genre it is.
Well, that's the problem. They can't
Because
they can't peg you into one specific, so they don't know where to put you or what to do with you.
Well, right now I'm unintentionally the biggest thing in cold case, and I did not intend that at all.
I did notice on your website there was a lot of
EAR.
a lot of cold cases you've delved into.
Yeah, when I went after EAR, or the East Area Rapist, you would know him down there as the original Night Stalker.
Right. Yes.
I put up my new website. Finally, I got a new website because I could make fun of my unusual last name. So it's the Quester Files. So now I'm known as the Quester, or the Q Man, or Kolchak with a Q. And so it's when the Quester Files went up, and I started separating myself from any nautical association, that I took off again. And cold case people, a lot don't care. Like in Zodiac and so forth,
Yeah,
because I start going back and just trying to actually investigate. I'm not a debunker. I'm not some eager believer. But I just try and lay it out, what in context is actually, the facts of the crime, and then try and solve it. And so right now, because of EAR, I probably do have him finally identified. And so the Sheriff's Office did contact me for my input up here.
Yeah,
So
really?
we'll see what comes of it. If I can finally get this guy's handwriting, and it matches something found from him, and only then will law enforcement go after DNA. They have to have an awful lot to go after familial DNA.
Oh, okay.
And that's what everybody's waiting on.
So
That's
DNA
what
is
all
kind of an
the coverage I'm getting.
afterthought to validate everything, as opposed to it's the ends, not the beginnings. Interesting.
Well, for cold case, it takes a lot.
Yeah.
For a hot case, they'll trample the hedge to go get DNA from someone.
Okay.
But when someone's dead, they're not going to exhume a body on someone's claim.
Right.
They're not going to go to a nephew or a brother or a father and say, so forth has an idea. You have to have an awful lot of DAs. No one will go for DNA without probable cause. And since EAR, in one of his incidents in Danville, where he was interrupted and fled, the bloodhounds traced his scent to where the car must have been parked, his car, and found paperwork that must have come out when he ripped the door open to jump in. It has handwriting on it. And if I can match that handwriting with my person of interest, then I finally have enough to at least push, I have to give it to the actual cold case detectives with law enforcement and see if they can't get DNA from someone I don't know. His whole family's dead except for one sibling, and they like male DNA to compare.
Well, they prefer male. Okay.
For a man, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because I'm looking at your website right now, and you
Which one?
Well, the questerfiles.com. And I remember watching a documentary about the Zodiac killer.
Well, it was a movie.
Yeah, or maybe it was a movie, and I found it very fascinating.
Fincher's movie.
Because I'm a big, like I said, I'm a big mystery person too. I love the crime, especially the one. It's a big kind of social media right now. Making a Murderer, the one on Netflix. It's been kind of like a social media.
Yeah.
But how do you choose those? Because there's other ones I see. Then Came the Dawn, and I guess, is that about Amelia Earhart? And so how do you choose those? Because there's so many mysteries out there and different crime stories and true crime stories that are very fascinating. How do you go about it? Just something that piques your interest?
It's the latest mystery that I wish to pursue, I guess. With Cold Case, I only started that in 2010, and with Cold Case, you have to start with Jack the Ripper because that's where everybody starts.
Right.
With the Ripper as the greatest unsolved, and then the greatest enigma would be the Manson murders.
Oh yeah.
And all that got delayed because I got onto EAR and Zodiac, so I should have actually, instead of Scarlet Autumn being the only true crime one out of mine, which is about Jack the Ripper, I should have the Manson Chronicles out, but I just got so waylaid. But after I did Jack the Ripper after a couple of years, and I thought, Zodiac is so close to me, I can go to the actual crime scenes.
Right.
I had to go back in history to do Whitechapel. I had to go on Google Earth to see what was left of the East End, or a friend over there might have go and take a picture of what's left of a crime scene area. Most of it has been bulldozed.
Yeah.
Or blitzed from the war. But with Zodiac, I got hooked. I had been quite ill. I was coming out of it. I could go locally. I didn't have to go around the world to do anything.
Right.
And he's the most boastful killer. And so to out someone like that is quite appealing.
Sure.
But I'm not a great photographer, but I started doing that, going to the crime scenes more than once, working out how all this had to be done, doing all the logistics. And that's what really hooked me, is that I could go and do it myself. It's not just a question of sitting here doing historical research. And so that's, I think, what really got me excited about Cold Case, is that each one is then different. It's not just one mystery you're doing for years and years, one subject.
Right.
And then I got stymied. I didn't know how it worked to turn someone in. Because I came upon someone I was sure was the Zodiac. He's still my suspect. He's been on the web for 4 years as my suspect under an alias name. And I will use his real name in the book, if I'm right. But I thought you had to get in good with the district attorney, and I was trying to find out who's the best route to go.
Right.
There's an awful lot of politics to murder. You'll be surprised.
It doesn't.
I wanted to
surprise
name
me
an
at all.
article, "The Politics of Murder," but I thought that would be too controversial.
Then you should do it.
The controversy sells. Come on, you're going to get some notoriety.
That's right.
But then I read Larry Crompton's book, Sudden Terror. He's a retired lieutenant from Costa County. And as I was stymied with Zodiac at the time, still trying to get more information, I was amazed by this villain I never heard about called the East Area Rapist. And Crompton's book, Sudden Terror, I would recommend to anybody out there. He was one of the Contra Costa investigators. And I, at that time, my sister and I inherited our mother's house after she passed away around the Sacramento area. So that where EAR began, East Area Rapist, he got his name from the East Area of Sacramento where he began. And I said, well, that's real easy for me to go.
Right. There
so
you
while
go.
I was working on Zodiac, I started visiting all the crime scenes. They so much was lost that I had to try and figure out how to backwork this guy's stalking MO, because he attacked people in the home. And he had such a complex method of prowling a neighborhood and getting in and getting out unseen that it took me a couple of years just to find all the streets. He had over 50 victims, so we're talking about
Wow. That's a lot.
a lot of homes I
Busy
had to
guy.
find. Then Contra Costa County, he moved on and struck there, and then he went south into your area where he turned murderer in Goleta, Ventura, Irvine, Dana Point. And so finally DNA linked him in the late 1990s to being the original Night Stalker.
That's crazy.
And so we're talking about California's #1 serial
So
offender in history, and no one ever had a prime suspect for him.
Did he get sloppy, or what was the?
He never got sloppy. No, he was too calculating. I call him the real-life Michael Myers, because nothing stopped him. Dogs didn't stop him. He would get in the house before once or twice. He would put ligatures under furniture. He might feed the dog. He might unload your gun
Wow.
So he
and
did
put
his
the bullets
homework.
neatly under your beds and then try
Oh
and
my
bait you to go for your gun.
Oh my goodness, he did his homework big time. Wow.
Yes, you people should really, because I'm not going to write a book about this. The Quester Files has the huge. I'm leading in the web right now on this subject.
No doubt.
But if you want to read a book, read Larry Crompton's Sudden Terror or Richard Shelby's Hunting a Psychopath. Well, he was one of the original investigators in Sacramento. And then Jack Gray, who's a private investigator in your neck of the woods in Alta Loma, wrote a book, Hot Prowl. And all these three are essentially self-published books because none of the biggies touched it.
Right, they won't touch it.
But they're invaluable books for someone who wants to read about really the number one serial offender you can imagine and who has gotten away with it scot-free. And he was active for 10 years. So there's at least 10 to 12 murders that he's responsible for and at least 50 rapes. And
Oh my God.
it's not really rape. He was a terrorist. That was only one thing he did. And you really cannot fully appreciate that unless you read that section of my website or Lieutenant Crompton's book.
Now, do you feel that this individual still alive, or do you think he's?
He could be. He started young, so he might not even be 60 yet, and he started in 1976.
Okay.
But my person of interest, who is so far now the premier person of interest, he is dead.
No.
Ah, okay.
And so that's another big nightmare for me to get familial DNA.
Sure.
And that's why I have to get the handwriting, because otherwise it's not going to happen.
Right.
Well, I'm
The
going to be.
FBI has reopened the case. The Air Force has reopened the case
Oh, they have.
because they suspect he killed an Air Force sergeant up in Rancho Cordova and his wife.
Oops.
And so, fortunately, my website has gotten so much attention because of the East Area Rapist section of it. I don't know, it's about 80 pages, just that one section, that it has really gotten this guy the attention he should have so he can finally be outed.
Good.
Well, before we only have about 3 minutes left, I'm going to ask you back for the show because I want to talk more about, definitely some of these mysteries, murderers, and Jack the Ripper, and definitely Bigfoot. But before we go, I remember watching another. I love documentaries on the Jack the Ripper, and they even had an American that lived over there that some people thought was Jack the Ripper that happened to move over there and they moved back to America. Did you hear about that?
Tumbledy?
Yes, Tumbledy. Yeah.
No, I forget whose favorite he is. That might be. No, I don't think it's Tumbledy. There's someone else says his uncle did it. The English at the time were sure an American had to be responsible because no Englishman would do this.
Ah.
So it had to be a foreigner, and they opted for an American or someone from the continent. And there's always some Frenchman who's committing murder.
Trying to blame it on us.
And but no, there's so much folklore around Jack the Ripper. I had to take that on in Scarlet Autumn. Jack the Ripper was not even after uteri. That's what you'll hear today, that he was some sex killer after cutting out the uterus.
Ooh.
And that was not the case at all.
That's
So
pretty crazy.
the inquest reading, the minutes are online. You can read what the doctors say about each case in detail. And he was really quite a predator. He would even disappear afterward. He'd wear, a deerstalker hat. That's the hat Sherlock Holmes would wear.
Yeah.
Which is a hat you did not wear in the urban environment. You only wore that in the country. And he yet was completely transparent in the East End, despite the fact he wore a hat that would have made him stand out like someone wearing an Elmer Fudd hat today.
So, like hiding in plain sight.
Yes, so I think he just used it to stalk his victims. He was seen twice with them beforehand wearing that hat, and he probably put another hat on afterward and just walked quietly away and got out. But no, there's an awful lot to the Ripper that people don't know about because most of the books are just someone brushing through all the cases so they can introduce their own pet suspect. But Scarlet Autumn is not about that. I'm not naming an individual that I give people the top echelon of viable suspects, but it's an entire vivid recreation of the crimes and times, as I say, of Jack the Ripper.
Well,
It's to be the one volume you have in order to assess all the suspects.
well, Gian, I have to say you're a fascinating man.
That's amazing. Very diversified.
Yeah, so diverse, and I'm sitting half the time. I'm just sitting here listening to you because the research that you have done is so in depth, and
It's amazing.
where most people skim over most of the evidence. So I so appreciate you being here with us, and I really hope that you can come back and talk to us more about some of the other books that you've written on. And for the people that are listening today, if you tuned in halfway through, or if you just tuned in, make sure you listen to this podcast on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, tune in, and then watch us on our
YouTube
channel.
And of course, here at UBN Radio.
Of course, always. Well, and we want to thank you so much, and make sure you go to iTunes or Amazon, pick up some of his books, and then go to thequesterfiles.com. That's a great website.
Spell Quester.
Yeah, it's Quester. And so definitely come back and see us again. We hope you do.
Well, thanks for joining us, and it's been fascinating.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.
Have a great night.
All right, well, take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
All right, well, we're going to take we're not going to take a break. We're just going to get the hell out of here.
We're gone.
Well, Walt, thank you so much for sitting in today.
Thank you
I appreciate
for filling in. It was a thrill filling for Eddie. It's always a thrill.
Yeah,
Eddie, get better.
Yeah, don't give it to me. That's what he said. I'll come. And I'm like, if you're coming and you're sick, I'm out of here. All right, well, you're going to stick around for Shar Vision. She is next, and she's live in studio, and they're going to be doing a live reading in the studio, so make sure you stick around. It's going to be good. All right, you're listening to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Walt Lusk.
And you're listening to us on Universal Broadcasting Network. See you next time.